I am 28 years old, a woman who had, until that night, believed in the simple goodness of family. My father, Mark, was 60. He was a man who had built his life on trust and hard work, and his faith in others was both his greatest strength and his most profound weakness. The snow was falling outside, blanketing the world in a pristine white that felt like a lie. Inside, the scent of roast turkey and pine needles filled our home, the same home my grandfather had built with his own two hands. It was Christmas Day, a time meant for warmth and fellowship. The illusion of peace was shattered when the doorbell rang. My mother, Sarah, frowned. We were not expecting anyone else. Our small family was all gathered: me, my parents, and my father's brother, Uncle Leo, with his wife, Aunt Clara. My dad rose from his chair at the head of the table, a look of mild confusion on his face. He opened the front door, and a gust of cold air swirled into the dining room. A man stood on our doorstep, tall and grim, holding a briefcase. He was not dressed for a Christmas visit. He wore a dark suit, his face etched with a seriousness that did not belong in our festive home. "Mark?" the man asked, his voice low and formal. "Yes, that's me," my father answered. "Can I help you? It is Christmas." "I am sorry to intrude," the man said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "My name is David Harrison. I am the manager at the downtown branch of the Citibank." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air settled over me. I watched my uncle and aunt. Leo's fork was paused halfway to his mouth, his expression a carefully constructed mask of surprise. Clara's eyes were wide, but she was looking at her husband, not at the stranger in our hall. It was a fleeting glance, but it was enough. Something was wrong. "The bank?" my mother asked, standing up. "Is there a problem with our account?" Mr. Harrison walked into the dining room, his gaze fixed on my father. He looked uncomfortable, but also determined. "I am afraid it is more serious than that, Mr. Mark," he said. He did not seem to know my father's last name, which was odd. I was processing the final paperwork for a property transfer this morning, and the address seemed familiar. I felt I had a professional and moral obligation to come here in person. My father's smile was strained. "A property transfer? I think you must have the wrong house. We have lived here for 30 years. My father built this house." The bank manager opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thick folder. His hands were steady as he laid a document on the edge of our dining table, next to the platter of sliced turkey. "According to our records," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "this house was sold yesterday." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. My father stared at him, then at the paper. He did not reach for it. He just stood there, his face paling, his breath catching in his throat. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I looked at Uncle Leo again. He was shaking his head slowly, a look of profound sympathy on his face that was utterly false. I knew it was false. I could feel it in my bones. "Sold?" My dad finally whispered. "That cannot be. That is impossible. This is our home." "I understand this is a shock," Mr. Harrison said, his tone softening slightly. "The deed was transferred to a new owner. The transaction was finalized on Christmas Eve." "Who?" my mother cried out, her voice cracking. "Who would buy our house without us knowing?" The bank manager hesitated, looking from my mother's distraught face to my father's stunned silence. "The buyer is a limited liability company," he said, "an entity called Northwood Properties, LLC. I had never heard that name before. It sounded generic, anonymous. My father finally seemed to find his voice, though it was rough with disbelief. "This is a mistake," he insisted, his voice rising. "A clerical error. There is no way I would ever sell this house. It has been in our family for generations." Uncle Leo finally spoke, his voice dripping with concern. "Mark, are you sure? Maybe you signed something you forgot about? You have had a lot on your mind lately." I turned to look at my uncle. He was a man who always seemed to be chasing something just out of his reach. He had a history of failed business ventures and always seemed to harbor a quiet resentment for my father's simple, stable life. His words were like poison, planting a seed of doubt not in the situation, but in my father himself. "I would not forget selling my own home, Leo," my dad snapped, a rare flash of anger in his eyes. Of course not," Leo said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I am just trying to understand. This is all so strange." Mr. Harrison pushed the document a little further onto the table. "The signature on the transfer deed was notarized and appears to be valid," he said quietly. "It matches the signature we have on file for you, Mr. Mark." My father picked up the paper. His hands trembled so violently that the document rattled. He stared at the signature line at the bottom. It was his name, written in his familiar, slightly slanted script. But there was something off about it. Something too perfect. Too deliberate. It was his signature, but it felt like a ghost of it. "I did not sign this," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "This is my name, but I did not sign this paper." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by my mother's quiet sobs. The festive dinner was forgotten, the food growing cold on our plates. The Christmas tree in the corner, with its twinkling lights and homemade ornaments, seemed to mock us with its cheerful glow. Our home, the center of our world, had been stolen from under our feet, and the thief, I was becoming more certain with every passing second, was sitting right here at our table, pretending to share in our grief. I looked from my uncle's false face to my aunt's nervous hands, which were twisting a napkin in her lap. My shock was hardening into something else, something cold and sharp. It was a feeling I had never truly experienced before. Pure, unadulterated rage. And with it came a quiet, resolute decision. I would find out what happened, and I would make them pay. The bank manager, Mr. Harrison, did not stay long after delivering his devastating news. He expressed his sincere apologies for ruining our Christmas, but he reiterated that the bank's legal position was clear. The paperwork was filed, the transaction recorded. From a legal standpoint, the house no longer belonged to my father. He left his card on the table and saw himself out, leaving behind a silence that was heavier and more suffocating than any argument could ever be. For a long time, no one moved. My father remained standing, holding the copy of the deed transfer, his knuckles white. My mother had sunk back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. The only sounds were her muffled sobs and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a clock that had marked the passing hours in this house for over 60 years. Finally, Uncle Leo cleared his throat. The sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Mark, Sarah," he began, his voice oozing a practiced sympathy. "This is a terrible, terrible thing. I cannot imagine what you are going through." Aunt Clara nodded beside him, her expression a perfect mirror of her husband's concern. "We are here for you," she said softly. "Whatever you need, you just have to ask. You can stay with us, of course, for as long as you need." The offer of charity was like a slap in the face. My father looked up from the document, his eyes hollow. "Stay with you?" he repeated, his voice flat. "Leo, this is my home. I am not going anywhere." "But Mark," the man said. Leo started, but my dad cut him off. "I do not care what he said." My father's voice boomed, startling all of us. He slammed the paper down on the table. "It is a fraud, a forgery. Someone has done this to us, and I am going to find out who." Leo leaned back in his chair, affecting a look of cautious reason. "You have to be careful, brother. Making accusations like that, it is serious. We need to think this through calmly. Maybe there is a simple explanation." "What simple explanation is there for our house being sold without our knowledge?" My mother cried, her voice rising with hysteria. "Someone stole our home on Christmas Eve." "Now, Sarah, let's not jump to conclusions," Leo said smoothly. "Mark, think back. Have you signed any documents recently? Anything at all? Sometimes these legal papers can be confusing." My father sank into his chair, the fight seeming to drain out of him as quickly as it had appeared. He ran a hand over his face, looking tired and old. I do not know, he stammered. I signed things for work, for the bills, but nothing like this. Nothing that would let someone take my house. I watched my uncle, my suspicion growing into a burning certainty. He was leading my father, guiding his memory toward a place of confusion and self-doubt. It was a classic manipulation tactic, one I had seen him use in smaller ways for years, usually to get my dad to invest in one of his doomed business schemes. I am sure you did not, Mark, I said, my voice firm. Dad, you are meticulous with paperwork. You would never sign away the house by accident. My father looked at me, a flicker of gratitude in his tired eyes. He trusted me. That trust felt like a heavy weight, a responsibility I had to honor. Leo turned his attention to me, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Of course he is, he said. But even the most careful person can make a mistake. We are all just trying to help your father figure this out. His condescending tone grated on my nerves. Helping would be trying to figure out who Northwood Properties LLC is, not trying to convince Dad he is losing his mind, I retorted. The air grew tense. Aunt Clara shot me a venomous look before quickly smoothing her features back into a mask of concern. Leo's smile tightened. I am only suggesting we explore all possibilities, he said. The rest of the evening was a blur of forced pleasantries and underlying dread. Leo and Clara stayed for another hour, offering empty platitudes and promises of support. Their presence felt like a violation, their feigned sympathy an insult to our genuine pain. When they finally left, promising to call first thing in the morning, a profound and miserable silence descended upon the house once more. My mother busied herself clearing the table, her movements stiff and robotic. It was something to do, a way to avoid confronting the terrifying new reality we faced. My father had retreated to his armchair in the living room, the fraudulent deed still clutched in his hand. He stared into the fireplace where the embers of the Christmas fire were slowly dying. I went to him and knelt by his chair. Dad, I said softly, we will fight this. We will get the house back. He did not look at me. He just shook his head slowly. He thinks I am a fool, he whispered. Who does? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Leo, he said, his voice thick with a pain that went deeper than the loss of a house. My own brother. He sat there and suggested I was incompetent, that I was so forgetful I could sign away my own home and not remember it. The betrayal was twofold. There was the theft of the house, a tangible and devastating loss. But then there was this, the erosion of trust, the insidious suggestion that my father was no longer capable. It was a cruel and calculated blow, aimed at his pride and his sense of self. He is wrong, I said fiercely, and we are going to prove it. That night I could not sleep. I lay in my childhood bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the house, every creak and groan feeling like a farewell. This was the only home I had ever known. It was where I took my first steps, where my dad taught me to ride a bike in the driveway, where my mom tucked me in at night. The walls were filled with our memories, our laughter, our tears. The thought of strangers living here, of my parents being cast out, was unbearable. My anger burned away my grief. This was not a random act of fraud by a faceless criminal. This was personal. The timing, on Christmas Eve, was designed to inflict maximum pain. The way my uncle immediately tried to gaslight my father pointed to a deep-seated jealousy and malice. He did not just want the house. He wanted to humiliate his brother, to break his spirit. I got out of bed and went to my laptop. The name the bank manager had given us echoed in my mind. Northwood Properties LLC. It was a generic, meaningless name, the kind of name someone would choose to hide behind. I opened a search engine and typed it in. The search results were a sea of similar names, other companies in other states. I narrowed the search to our state's business registry. My heart pounded in my chest as I clicked through the official government website. The interface was clunky and old, but it was functional. I found the business entity search page and carefully typed in the name. I hit enter. A single result appeared: Northwood Properties, LLC, incorporated 3 months ago. My breath hitched. This was a new company, created for a specific purpose. I clicked to view the details. The public information was sparse. There was a registered agent listed, but the address was just a P.O. box at a mail services store downtown. It was a dead end, a deliberate wall to ensure anonymity. But there was one other piece of information available: the name of the organizer who filed the incorporation documents. My eyes scanned the line. The name was not one I recognized at first. It was a woman's name. But the last name, it was familiar. It was my Aunt Clara's maiden name. A wave of cold certainty washed over me. It was them. It had to be them. They had created a shell company, a ghost entity, using a name they thought was disconnected enough to avoid suspicion. They had used my aunt's family name, thinking no one would ever make the connection. But I had. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face. The pieces were starting to fall into place. This was not just a suspicion anymore. This was the beginning of proof. My uncle and aunt had not just betrayed us. They had planned this. They had meticulously set a trap for my trusting father, and he had walked right into it. The fight for our home had just begun, and I now knew exactly who my enemy was. The next morning, the house felt different. The festive decorations seemed hollow. The Christmas tree, a sad reminder of the joy that had been stolen from us. My parents were moving like ghosts through the rooms, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and disbelief. My dad had called our family lawyer, an old friend named George, who had promised to start looking into the matter immediately. But the legal process was slow, and the sense of violation was immediate and overwhelming. I waited until my mother was occupied in the kitchen before I approached my dad. He was in his study, sitting at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers he had pulled from his filing cabinets. He was searching for an explanation, for some document he might have signed that could have led to this nightmare. "Dad," I said, standing in the doorway, "can I ask you something?" He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "Anything," he said, his voice hoarse. I walked in and sat in the chair opposite his desk. I had to be careful how I phrased this. I did not want to upset him further, but I needed information. "Uncle Leo mentioned you might have signed something you forgot about. He said you have had a lot on your mind." My father's jaw tightened. He has been saying that for years. Every time one of his brilliant ideas costs me money, he tells me I was the one who was confused about the details. This was the opening I needed. "What kind of ideas?" I asked gently. "What sort of things has he had you sign in the past?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Oh, it is always something. A small investment in a new restaurant that never opens. A loan for a real estate deal that falls through. It is never a lot of money, just a few thousand here and there. He always makes it sound so promising." "And you sign papers for these things?" I pressed. "Sometimes," he admitted, looking ashamed. "He brings over these official-looking documents, partnership agreements, loan notes. He talks a big game, makes it all sound very professional. I trust him. He is my brother." The words hung in the air between us. He is my brother. It was the explanation for everything. My father's entire worldview was built on the foundation of family loyalty. The idea that his own brother could be systematically cheating him was something his mind could not easily accept. "Dad, think back to the last few months," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Specifically about 3 months ago. Did Leo bring you any papers to sign around that time?" He frowned, his brow furrowing in concentration. 3 months ago. Let's see. That would have been around September. "Yes," he said, his eyes lighting up with a flicker of memory. "Yes, he did. He had a new venture. Something about investing in commercial properties. He said it was a sure thing, a small group of family investors. He needed my signature to add me to the partnership. My blood ran cold. And you signed? He nodded, looking down at his hands. Yes, it was a whole stack of papers. He was in a hurry, said he had to get them to the lawyers before they closed. He pointed to where I needed to sign. I signed them. I did not read every page. I trusted him. This was it. This had to be it. Hidden within that stack of investment papers was the document that had destroyed our lives. A power of attorney, a quitclaim deed, something legal and binding that my father had signed without understanding its true nature. My uncle had counted on my father's trust, on his tendency to not read the fine print when dealing with family. Do you have a copy of those papers? I asked, my heart pounding. He shook his head sadly. No, Leo took the whole stack with him. He said he would get me a copy from his lawyer once everything was filed, but he never did. I forgot all about it until now. Of course he had. That was the plan all along. No paper trail for my father to review. No way for him to discover the deception until it was too late. Later that day, I decided to confront my uncle. Not with accusations, not yet. I needed to test the waters to see how he would react. I called him. Hello? He answered, his voice bright and cheerful. Uncle Leo, it is me, I said. Oh, sweetheart, I was just thinking about you all. How is your father holding up? He asked, the concern in his voice so thick it was nauseating. He is having a hard time, I said, keeping my tone neutral. He is trying to remember if he signed anything that could have caused this. He mentioned some investment papers you brought over in September for a commercial property venture. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. It was only a second, but it was long enough for me to know I had hit a nerve. Oh, that, he said, his voice a little too casual. Yes, I remember, but that has nothing to do with this. That was a completely separate matter. A small investment, that is all. He does not have a copy of the papers, I said. He was hoping you could send one over so our lawyer can look at them. Just to rule it out, you know. Another pause. This one longer. A copy? He repeated. Well, I do not have them. The lawyers have them. It is all filed away. It would be a whole process to dig them up. And honestly, it is a waste of time. That investment is completely unrelated to the house. But if it is unrelated, why would it be a problem to get a copy? I asked, pushing just a little. His voice sharpened, the fake sympathy gone, replaced by an edge of irritation. Look, he said, I am trying to help your father, not chase down paperwork for a wild goose chase. The problem is not some investment I am managing. The problem is that someone committed fraud against your dad, and we need to focus on finding the real criminals, not on bothering me. He was good. He was very good. He twisted the narrative immediately, positioning himself as a victim's ally and me as a distraction. He was trying to make me feel foolish for even asking. I am just trying to help Dad explore every possibility, like you suggested, I said calmly. Well, this is not a possibility, he snapped. It is a dead end. Now I have to go. Clara and I are heading out. We will pray for you all. And with that, he hung up. I stood in the kitchen, the phone still in my hand. His defensiveness was more damning than any confession. He was hiding something, and he was panicking because I was getting close. My resolve hardened. I was no longer just looking for the truth. I was gathering ammunition. I called my best friend, Chloe. She was a paralegal at a big law firm, and she knew her way around public records and corporate filings better than anyone I knew. Chloe, I need a huge favor, I said, the words tumbling out of me. I explained everything that had happened, from the bank manager's visit to the discovery of the LLC and my phone call with Leo. She listened patiently, letting me vent my fear and my fury. When I was done, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, He is a monster. Of course I will help you. What do you need? The LLC, I said. Northwood Properties. The registered agent is just a mail service, and the organizer is listed under my aunt's maiden name. It feels like a wall, but there has to be a way to see who is really behind it. There is always a way, Chloe said, a determined edge in her voice. Corporate anonymity is an illusion if you know where to poke. Filing documents often have more metadata than people realize. Sometimes the digital signatures or the filing attorney's name can lead you somewhere. Let me see what I can dig up. I have access to some databases that are not available to the public. Thank you, Chloe, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. I feel like I am fighting this alone. You are not alone, she said firmly. We are going to nail this guy to the wall. Hanging up the phone, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My uncle thought he was clever. He had underestimated my father, thinking him too trusting and gentle to fight back. But he had made a much bigger mistake. He had underestimated me. The next few days were a strange and agonizing limbo. My parents tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the unspoken terror hung over every meal, every conversation. My dad met with George, the lawyer, who confirmed our worst fears. Reversing a property sale, even a fraudulent one, was a difficult and expensive legal battle. The burden of proof would be on us. We would have to prove in court that the signature was a forgery, and that my father had been deceived. George was a kind, methodical man, but he was blunt about our chances. It comes down to evidence, Mark, he said, his steepled fingers resting on his desk. Right now, it is your word against a legally notarized document. It is a very steep hill to climb. My dad came home from that meeting looking defeated. The fight seemed to be draining the life out of him. He started spending more and more time in his study. Not working, just sitting. I would bring him meals, and he would barely touch them. The stress was taking a physical toll. He looked thinner, his face gaunt, his eyes clouded with a deep, weary sadness. Meanwhile, Chloe was working her magic. She called me every evening with updates. Okay, so the LLC was filed by a cut-rate online service, she reported one night. Totally anonymous, but I was able to trace the IP address that paid for the filing fee. It is a dead end, a public library computer. He is covering his tracks. So that is it? I asked, my heart sinking. No, not at all, she said quickly. That is just the first layer. The notary on the deed transfer, a Mr. Paul Jensen. I looked him up. His license is valid, but he has had 3 complaints filed against him in the last 2 years for procedural errors. He works out of a check cashing place on the other side of town. Not exactly the kind of professional your dad would use. My dad has used the same notary for 20 years, I said, a new idea beginning to form. A woman named Mrs. Gable. She has an office just a few blocks from here. That is interesting, Chloe said. That is very interesting. A legitimate transaction would almost certainly have gone through her. The fact that they used this other guy is suspicious. It suggests they needed someone who would not ask too many questions. The next morning, I went to see Mrs. Gable. Her office was a small, tidy room in a quiet, professional building. She was an older woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She remembered me and my father instantly. It is so good to see you, she said. How is your father doing? He is going through a difficult time, Mrs. Gable, I said, my voice trembling slightly. That is actually why I am here. I explained the situation, showing her a copy of the fraudulent deed. I watched her face as she examined the document. Her warm smile vanished, replaced by a look of stern disapproval. This is not my stamp, she said, pointing to the notary seal. And this is not my signature. I have never seen this document before in my life. Would you be willing to sign an affidavit stating that? I asked, my pulse quickening. A sworn statement that you did not notarize this signature for my father? She looked me directly in the eye. I have known your father for 2 decades, she said firmly. He is an honest man. What has been done to him is a crime. Of course I will sign an affidavit. I will testify in court if I have to. I left her office clutching the signed and notarized affidavit, a piece of paper that felt as heavy and as powerful as a weapon. This was the first piece of concrete evidence we had. It did not prove who had committed the fraud, but it proved that the transaction itself was illegal. The notarization was fraudulent. The entire sale was built on a lie. That afternoon, I received another call from Chloe. Her voice was buzzing with excitement. "I have got something," she said. "It is not a smoking gun, but it is a very, very hot lead." "What is it?" I asked, pacing back and forth in my room. "The LLC, Northwood Properties. It has a bank account. It had to, in order to process the sale. I have a friend who works in financial compliance. I called in a big favor. She ran a search for me, very off the record. And the account was opened 2.5 months ago. The signatory on the account, the person who has control over the money, is listed as Clara," Chloe said, and I could hear the grin in her voice. "Your dear Aunt Clara." I stopped pacing. The room felt suddenly very still. "Are you sure?" I whispered. 100%, she confirmed. "It is her. Her full name, her social security number. She is the sole signatory. Your uncle is clever, using her maiden name on the incorporation documents. But he got sloppy with the bank. He needed a real person with a real social security number to open the account. He used his wife." This was it. The link. The undeniable connection between my aunt and uncle and the anonymous company that had stolen our home. They had set up a shell company, tricked my father into signing away his house to it, and then set up a bank account in my aunt's name to control the asset. "Chloe, you are a genius," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know," she said lightly. "Now, what are you going to do with this information?" I looked out my window at the snow-covered yard, at the swings that my dad had built for me when I was a child. A cold, hard resolve settled deep within me. My uncle had tried to break my father's spirit, to humiliate him, to take everything from him. He had used my father's trust as a weapon against him. But the fight was no longer just my father's. It was mine. And I was not going to be beaten. I now had proof of a fraudulent notarization and a direct financial link between my aunt and the shell company. The time for quiet investigation was over. It was time to start setting a trap of my own. My first move was a calculated risk. I needed to let my uncle know that the walls were closing in, but without revealing everything I had. I wanted to make him nervous, to see if he would make a mistake. I decided to use the information about the notary. I called him that evening. "Uncle Leo," I said, my voice as calm and steady as I could make it. "I have some interesting news about the house." "Oh?" he said, his voice wary. "What is that?" "Our lawyer has been looking into the deed transfer," I said, "and he found a problem with the notarization. A big one." "A problem?" he repeated. "What kind of problem?" "The notary?" "A Mr. Paul Jensen. It turns out he is under investigation for fraud. The state is reviewing all of his recent notarizations. Our lawyer thinks the one on Dad's deed is going to be invalidated." I was lying, of course. There was no state investigation that I knew of. But it was a plausible lie, one that would be difficult for him to verify quickly. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the panic beginning to set in. "Well," he finally said, his voice strained. That is good news for Mark, I suppose. It means he might get the house back." He was trying to sound pleased, but the effort was transparent. "It is," I agreed, "but it also raises another question. If the notary was a fraud, it means whoever arranged the sale was either incredibly careless or they deliberately chose someone who would not follow the rules." "I am sure it was just bad luck," he said quickly. "These things happen." "Maybe," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "Anyway, I just wanted to let you know. The lawyer is filing a motion to have the sale voided immediately based on the fraudulent notarization. It seems like this might be over sooner than we thought." I hung up the phone, my heart racing. I had planted a seed of fear. He now knew that the foundation of his crime was crumbling. His carefully constructed plan had a fatal flaw, and I had just pointed a spotlight directly at it. Now I would wait and watch to see what he would do. The next few days were a tense waiting game. My parents, buoyed by the news of the fraudulent notary, were cautiously optimistic. My dad seemed to have a little of his old spark back. He started talking about the future again, about planting a new garden in the spring. It was a fragile hope, but it was better than the despair that had consumed him. I, on the other hand, was anything but calm. I felt like a hunter in a blind, waiting for my prey to make a move. I knew my uncle. He was not the type to sit back and let his plans fall apart. He would do something, try to fix his mistake, try to cover his tracks. The break came 3 days later. It was late at night, and I was just about to go to bed when my phone buzzed. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize. The message was short and cryptic. "You are right about my father. I cannot live with this. We need to talk. Ethan. Ethan. My cousin. Leo and Clara's only son." He was a quiet, introverted young man, a few years younger than me. He had always seemed uncomfortable around his parents' ambition and greed. I had not even considered him as a potential ally. My fingers trembled as I typed back. "Where and when?" He replied instantly. "The coffee shop by the old library. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Please come alone." I did not sleep at all that night. My mind was racing with possibilities. Was this a trap? Was Leo using his own son to get to me? Or was Ethan genuinely reaching out, his conscience finally getting the better of him? I decided I had to take the risk. The next morning, I drove to the coffee shop. It was a small, quiet place, mostly empty at that time of day. I saw Ethan sitting at a small table in the back corner, staring into a cup of coffee. He looked pale and stressed, with dark circles under his eyes. I sat down opposite him. "Ethan," I said softly, "thank you for meeting me." He flinched when I said his name, as if he was not used to being addressed directly. He would not meet my eyes. "I should not be here," he whispered. "You did the right thing," I said. He shook his head. "You do not understand. My father, he is furious. Ever since you called him about that notary, he has been on the phone constantly, yelling at people. He is scared." "He should be," I said, my voice hard. "He stole my father's house." Ethan finally looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a deep, weary shame. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I heard them. All these months. They have been planning it for a long time. They called it securing my inheritance. They said your dad was too soft, that he did not deserve what Grandpa left him." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. They had rationalized their theft, painting my father as unworthy of his own home, his own legacy. "They had him sign the papers in my dad's office," Ethan continued, his words spilling out in a rush. "My dad told him it was an investment, that he was getting him in on the ground floor of a big deal. He had a whole stack of papers, and he just pointed and said, 'Sign here, here, and here.' Your dad did not even read them. He just signed." Ethan's account confirmed everything my father had told me. It was a direct eyewitness account of the deception. "Ethan, would you be willing to tell this to our lawyer?" I asked gently. "Would you be willing to sign a statement?" He flinched again, curling in on himself. "I cannot," he whispered. "He is my father. If I did that, he would destroy me. My mother would never forgive me. They would cut me off completely." I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He was trapped, caught between his conscience and his loyalty to a family that was poisoning him. "I understand," I said. "I will not pressure you." But then he leaned forward, his eyes wide with a desperate urgency. "But I can help you," he said. "There is proof. Real proof." "What proof?" I asked, leaning in. "The papers," he said. "The original stack of papers your dad signed." My father did not give them all to the lawyers. He is arrogant. He kept a copy of the whole package for his own files. He likes to gloat, to look at them and feel smart. My heart started to pound. Where are they? In his home office, Ethan said. In the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. It is locked, but I know where he keeps the key. It is taped to the underside of his desk. He was handing me the key to his father's downfall. It was an incredible risk for him, and an even bigger one for me. Why are you doing this, Ethan? I asked quietly. He looked down at his hands again. Because I see what this is doing to him, he said. This greed. It is making him into a monster. And I look at your dad. Uncle Mark has always been so kind to me. He does not deserve this. No one does. He took a deep breath. My parents are going out tomorrow night. For their anniversary. They will be gone for at least 4 hours. The house will be empty. He was not just giving me the location of the proof. He was giving me the opportunity to get it. The idea was insane. Breaking into my uncle's house? It was a crime. But what they had done to my father was so much worse. I looked at my young, tormented cousin. He was offering me a chance to save my family, at great personal risk to himself. I knew I had to take it. Thank you, Ethan, I said, my voice filled with a gratitude that was almost painful. You are a good person. He just shook his head, a single tear tracing a path down his pale cheek. No, I am not, he whispered, but I am trying to be. I left the coffee shop with my mind reeling. The plan was terrifying, but the potential reward was everything. The original documents would contain the fraudulent deed. The thing that gave them power over us nestled right alongside the legitimate-looking investment papers. It would be the complete story of their deception, all in one file. It would be the smoking gun George said we needed. That night, I told Chloe my plan. Are you insane? She asked, her voice a mixture of shock and admiration. You cannot break into his house. You will go to jail. It is the only way, I insisted. He will never hand those papers over willingly, and Ethan will not testify. This is our only shot to get undeniable proof before this ends up in a court battle that could drag on for years and bankrupt my parents. There has to be another way, she argued. We can get a subpoena for the documents. And give him time to destroy them? I countered. No, he thinks he is safe. He thinks the originals are his private trophy. I have a window of opportunity and I am taking it. Chloe was silent for a long moment. I knew she was thinking about the risks, the legal ramifications. But I also knew she understood the stakes. Okay, she said finally, her voice resigned but firm. If you are going to do this, you are going to do it smart. No mistakes. You get in, you get the file, you get out. And you do not leave a single trace that you were ever there. We spent the next hour on the phone, planning every detail. Chloe, with her paralegal's mind, thought of everything. I was to wear gloves. I was to park my car several blocks away and walk. I was to take pictures of the documents with my phone, not take the originals. If I took the originals, Leo could claim I stole them and planted the evidence. But if I only took pictures, the originals would still be in his possession, and he would have no idea I had a copy. He would walk into the final confrontation completely unaware that I held all the cards. The next evening, my nerves were stretched to the breaking point. I watched the clock, my hands clammy, my stomach in knots. At 7:30, exactly when Ethan said they would be leaving, I drove to my uncle's neighborhood. It was an affluent area, with large houses set far back from the road. It was the kind of neighborhood my uncle had always aspired to, the kind he felt he was entitled to. I parked my car 3 streets away and walked, my heart pounding with every step. I wore dark clothes and a hat pulled down low over my face. The house was dark, just as Ethan had said it would be. He had given me the spare key, which was hidden under a loose stone by the back patio. My hand trembled as I retrieved it and unlocked the back door. The house was silent and cold. I slipped inside. closing the door softly behind me. I had been in this house hundreds of times for family dinners and holidays, but now it felt alien, hostile. I made my way to the home office. It was a large, imposing room dominated by a heavy mahogany desk. I found the filing cabinet against the far wall. I put on the thin latex gloves Chloe had insisted I bring. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get them on. I knelt down and felt under the desk. My fingers brushed against a piece of tape. The key. Ethan was right. I took a deep breath and inserted the key into the lock on the bottom drawer. It turned with a soft click. I pulled the drawer open. It was filled with hanging files, each one neatly labeled. I scanned the labels. Taxes, insurance, stocks. And then I saw it. A file labeled with the name of the commercial property venture Leo had pitched to my dad. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted the file out of the drawer. It was thick, at least an inch thick. I carried it over to the desk and opened it. The first few pages were the investment prospectus, filled with jargon and impressive-looking charts. Then there were the partnership agreements. And then, tucked in the middle of the stack, I found it. It was the original quitclaim deed, transferring ownership of my parents' house to Northwood Properties, LLC. And on the signature line was my father's name. Below it was the signature and seal of the fraudulent notary, Paul Jensen. It was all there, the entire anatomy of the crime laid out in black and white. They had buried the deed transfer in the middle of a stack of boring investment papers, knowing my father would simply sign where he was told. I quickly and carefully laid the documents out on the desk. I took out my phone and began to photograph every single page, making sure each one was clear and legible. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to be steady. I took pictures of the investment papers, the deed, the notary stamp, everything. Once I was done, I put every page back in the exact order I had found it. I placed the file back in the drawer, locked it, and returned the key to its hiding place under the desk. I had been inside for less than 10 minutes. I slipped out the back door, locking it behind me, and placed the spare key back under the stone. I walked quickly, not running, back to my car. I did not look back. As I drove away, a sense of grim triumph washed over me. I had the proof. I had everything I needed to destroy my uncle's life. Just as he had tried to destroy my father's. The fear I had felt inside his house was replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. The final confrontation had to be perfect. It could not be a private argument or a legal meeting. It had to be public. It had to be a humiliation. My uncle cared more about his reputation and his image than anything else. I was going to strip him of it in front of the one audience he could not bear to lose. His family. The perfect opportunity was just a few days away. New Year's Eve. My grandparents, my dad, and Leo's parents always hosted a large family party. Everyone would be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins. It was the one time of year our entire extended family gathered in one place. It was the perfect stage. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I sent the photos of the documents to Chloe, who saved them in multiple secure locations. I met with my dad and our lawyer, George. I did not tell them how I had obtained the documents. I just said that a confidential source had provided them. George's eyes widened as he looked at the images on my laptop screen. "This is it," he said, his voice low with excitement. "This is the smoking gun. The deed is right there with the investment papers. This proves intent to deceive. This is not just a civil case anymore. This is criminal fraud, forgery, mail fraud. They could go to prison for this." My dad stared at the screen, his face a mixture of horror and vindication. Seeing the proof, seeing how his brother had so callously betrayed him, seemed to drain the last vestiges of hope he had for their relationship. But it also ignited a fire in his eyes that I had not seen since Christmas Day. "What do we do now?" he asked, looking at me. "We do not do anything," I said. "Not yet. We wait for New Year's Eve. I want to confront him in front of Grandma and Grandpa. I want the whole family to see him for what he is." My father hesitated. He was a private man, and the thought of such a public confrontation was daunting. But he looked at the evidence on the screen again, at the cold, hard proof of his brother's treachery, and he nodded. "Okay," he said. "We do it your way." The night of the party, the air at my grandparents' house was thick with tension. The news of my parents' situation had spread through the family, but the story was muddled. Most of them had heard Leo's version, that it was a tragic and mysterious fraud, and that he and Clara were doing everything they could to support their poor brother. Leo and Clara were in their element, playing the part of concerned, wealthy benefactors. I watched them circulate through the room, accepting sympathetic pats on the back, shaking their heads sadly as they spoke in hushed tones about my father's terrible luck. Clara even had the audacity to approach my mother and give her a hug, whispering, "We are all praying for you." My mother stiffened but did not pull away. She was playing her part too. My father and I stayed quiet, observing. We were a storm waiting to break. I had my phone in my pocket, the photos of the documents ready. George had advised me on the legal implications. As long as I did not admit to breaking and entering, the evidence itself, now that we had it, was likely admissible under various legal exceptions, especially in a criminal investigation. But my goal was not a courtroom victory. It was a family reckoning. At 10 o'clock, my grandfather stood up to make his traditional New Year's toast. After he was finished and everyone had taken a sip of champagne, I stood up. "I would like to say something too," I said, my voice clear and loud. The room quieted. All eyes turned to me. I saw a flicker of annoyance in my uncle's eyes, quickly masked by a patronizing smile. "I want to thank everyone for their support during this difficult time for my family," I began, "especially my Uncle Leo and Aunt Clara. They have been so concerned, so eager to help us understand how my father could have lost his home." Leo smiled benevolently, nodding his head. "We are family," he said. "We are always here for you." "I am glad to hear you say that," I said, my voice turning colder, "because I think you are the only one who can clear this up. You see, we have learned a few things. We have learned that the house was sold to a company called Northwood Properties." I paused, letting the name hang in the air. I saw Clara's hand tighten on her husband's arm. "It is a shell company, set up just a few months ago," I continued, my gaze locked on my uncle. "And we have also learned, Uncle Leo, that the company's bank account is controlled by one person. Your wife, my Aunt Clara." A collective gasp went through the room. Clara's face went completely white. Leo's smile vanished. "That is a ridiculous accusation," he blustered, his face turning red. "My wife has nothing to do with this." "Does she?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "Because this is a copy of the bank signature card for the LLC's account. And that is her name. That is her social security number." I did not actually have that document. Chloe's source was verbal, but he did not know that. I was bluffing, mixing the truth with gambles. The family members around them started to murmur, looking from me to Leo and Clara. The foundation of their perfect image was beginning to crack. "This is slander," Leo shouted, taking a step toward me. My father stepped in front of him. "Let her finish, Leo," my dad said, his voice low and dangerous. I did not flinch. "And then there are the papers you had my father sign in September," I said, my voice rising. "The investment for the commercial property venture. You told him it was a sure thing. You told him to sign here and here and here. You told him not to worry about reading the fine print." Leo was sputtering now, unable to form a coherent sentence. That was a legitimate business deal. It has nothing to do with the house." "Are you sure about that?" I asked. I held up my phone, displaying the photo of the quitclaim deed. "Because this is one of the papers you had him sign, tucked right in the middle of all that financial jargon. This is the paper that gave you our home." I projected the image from my phone onto the large television screen on the wall, which was set up for a holiday slideshow. The image of the deed, with my father's signature and the fraudulent notary's stamp, filled the screen. It was undeniable. The room fell into a dead silence. Everyone stared at the screen, then at Leo and Clara. Their faces were masks of pure horror. They were exposed utterly and completely. My grandmother, a formidable woman who had always been the family's matriarch, walked slowly toward her son. She looked at the screen, then at him. Her face was like stone. "Leo," she said, her voice trembling with a fury I had never heard from her before. "What have you done?" Leo opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked around the room, at the faces of his family, at the shock, the disgust, the condemnation. He had lost his audience. His perfect life, his carefully crafted reputation, had just been incinerated in front of everyone he knew. Clara burst into tears, a loud wailing sob that was both pathetic and infuriating. "He made me do it," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at her husband. "It was all his idea." And just like that, their partnership in crime dissolved into a desperate, ugly scramble for self-preservation. They started yelling at each other, hurling accusations and insults, revealing more and more details of their sordid little plan right there in my grandparents' living room. It was a grotesque spectacle, and no one tried to stop it. We all just watched as they tore each other apart. My father put his arm around me. "You did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I looked at my uncle, a man now revealed to be a petty, jealous thief. He was no longer the successful, charismatic brother. He was small, he was pathetic, and he was finished. The revenge was not just in getting our house back. It was in this moment, in the stripping away of all his lies, leaving him with nothing but the ugly truth of who he really was. The aftermath of that New Year's Eve party was swift and brutal. My uncle and aunt became pariahs. They left the party in disgrace, followed by the cold, silent stares of their entire family. The next day, my grandfather called my father. His voice was heavy with shame and sorrow. He said that he had spoken to Leo, and that Leo and Clara were no longer welcome in his home. He had disowned his own son. With the evidence I had gathered and Ethan's reluctant but firm corroboration to the family, our lawyer, George, filed an emergency motion with the court. He also took the evidence to the district attorney's office. The DA, seeing the clear evidence of forgery, fraud, and conspiracy, immediately opened a criminal investigation. Faced with irrefutable proof and the threat of a long prison sentence, Leo and Clara's fight collapsed. Their lawyer advised them to cooperate. They signed a confession admitting to the entire scheme. They agreed to immediately sign the house back over to my father, voiding the fraudulent sale completely. The legal ownership of our home was restored within 2 weeks. But that was only the beginning of their consequences. The criminal charges proceeded. They were charged with multiple felonies. Their carefully constructed life of affluence crumbled. They had to sell their big house to pay for their legal fees. Their friends, hearing of the scandal, abandoned them. They were left with nothing but their shared guilt and the ruins of their lives. I had a conversation with my mom a few weeks later. We were sitting in the living room, our living room, a fire crackling in the fireplace. The sense of peace was something I would never take for granted again. "I still cannot believe he did it," she said, shaking her head. "His own brother. How could he be filled with so much hate?" "It was not hate," I said. "It was jealousy. He could not stand that Dad was happy with a simple life. He needed to prove he was better, and the only way he could do that was by tearing Dad down." She reached out and took my hand. "You were so strong," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "You saved us. You saved your father." I squeezed her hand. I did what I had to do. They picked a fight with the wrong family. My dad's recovery was slower. The legal victory was a relief, but the emotional wound of his brother's betrayal was deep. He was quieter now, more reserved. The easy, trusting nature that had been his defining characteristic was gone, replaced by a cautious weariness. One afternoon, I found him in the backyard, tending to his dormant rose bushes, preparing them for spring. "They took a plea deal," I told him. "They will serve time. Not as much as they deserve, but they will not get away with it." He nodded, not looking up from his work. Good, he said quietly. We stood in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the snipping of his pruning shears. I am sorry, Dad, I said finally. I am sorry you had to go through this. He finally stopped and looked at me. His eyes were sad, but they were clear. Do not be sorry, he said. I am proud of you. You have a strength in you that I never knew. Your grandfather would have been proud too. He looked around at the yard, at the house. He built this place to be a home, a sanctuary. You protected it. You protected us. The wound would always be there, a scar on our family's history. But we were healing. We were together, and we were home. I even received a letter from Ethan. It was short. He told me he had moved out of his parents' house and was trying to start a new life. He was working a simple job and going to school at night. He apologized again for his father's actions and for his own cowardice. He ended the letter with a simple sentence. Thank you for showing me what it means to stand up for what is right. I hoped he would find his peace. The final piece of the fallout came a few months later. Leo and Clara were sentenced. They each received 3 years in prison, with another 5 years of probation. They lost their professional licenses and were ordered to pay restitution for my parents' legal fees. Their downfall was complete, public, and undeniable. My friend Chloe and I went out for dinner to celebrate. To you, she said, raising her glass. The quietest, most terrifying avenger I have ever met. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like a release. I was not quiet, I said. I just waited until I had something to say. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. It felt good to be normal again, to not have every waking thought consumed by a fight for survival. As I drove home that night, I thought about my uncle. I thought about the arrogance and greed that had driven him to betray his own family. He had seen my father's kindness as a weakness to be exploited. He had looked at our simple, happy life and had seen something he needed to possess and destroy. He thought that by taking our house, he could prove he was the stronger brother, the more successful man. But he had failed to understand a fundamental truth. A house is just wood and nails. A home is built of something stronger. It is built of love and loyalty and the fierce, unbreakable bond of family. He had tried to take our house, and in the end, he had only succeeded in losing his own soul. They had destroyed our family as we knew it, all for a piece of property. Now they had nothing, and we had everything that truly mattered. My uncle thought my father was weak. He never realized that I was the one he should have been afraid of.